recording? Oh, 1 second. And you can start whenever.
Start? Okay. We're good? All right. Thank you guys so much for coming. I know it's like craziness kind of happening in the world right now, but I appreciate you all taking the time to kind of like be here and listen to a little bit about my book, The Whales Boy. So whenever I do any of these type of like interviews or just like signings, I always like to start things out with a quote. And this is one of my favorite quotes. It's by William H. Gass, and it says, "The true alchemists do not change lead into gold. They change the world into words." And I think that's so powerful because it really shows how your words can transform not only someone's view, but just the world and add a little bit more magic to it. And kind of what I wanted to lead this signing into is to kind of like play on my book trailer that Great Fire Productions actually created for me. And I think that kind of like summarizes a little bit of the book, but it's also really awesome to kind of see your vision come to life through a video. So I'm going to play that for you guys right now, and I hope you enjoy.
It's funny, because I didn't either. My name is Angelica Grace, and I thought that this year would be different. It's been tough. I lost my mom, dad flew me from Michigan to Chicago, and basically I'm starting all over again. And I'm not going to cry anymore. Crying's stupid. Apparently there's this eerie tale attached to my mansion, one that people cannot seem to stop talking about. I didn't believe in ghost stories until I became a part of one. My name is Angelica Grace, and although you're following along with my story, it's not my tale to tell. It's his. Do you believe in ghost stories? Because you will now.
So not trying to give too much away, but a little bit about this story. It follows a 16-year-old girl, and I know we can all relate to one thing, whether you be male or female, but being 16 is a very intricate time in your life because you're going through so many different changes, and you're basically trying to figure out exactly who you are. So imagine going through all of these changes, but having the worst possible thing happen to you, which is losing someone that you really care about. And that's the case with Angelica. She loses her mom, and her mom is like her best friend. So she's not only going through, young adulthood, but she also loses a significant part of her life. And to make things a little bit worse, trying to make things better, her dad ends up taking her away from Michigan, which is her hometown, and brings her to the suburbs of Illinois. And so she's kind of going through just like all of these changes with everything, and then she basically is taken away from her comfort zone, from her friends, from her other family, and is basically changing her life altogether. And she gets this weird, interesting feeling when she moves into her mansion, and she's kind of thinking it's, just butterflies or nerves and stuff like that when she moves into this mansion. However, as she goes to school, she kind of makes a little bit of a friend with a girl named Mia, and that's actually her next door neighbor. And so she kind of builds a little bit of a relationship with Mia, and what she basically does is Mia takes her to school, and she hears about this eerie tale that comes along with her mansion. And she starts to hear like these ghost stories and how her mansion is haunted, and she basically doesn't believe in any of these like humbo jumbo ghost stories. But she starts to realize that there's little things kind of, going missing or things being moved around. And she starts to realize that there may be a lot more to the stories that she's hearing about more than she actually expected or realized. that's kind of a little bit of a synopsis of the story. One of the reasons that I like to say why, like a lot of people ask, like, oh, why did you write this? Or what kind of inspired you to, write a story like this? And I think the biggest thing is growing up, I used to read a lot of like period dramas. Like one of my favorite stories was Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, like all the huge classics. But I think the biggest thing that kind of deterred me from really getting into these stories is I didn't have a character that really looked like me. So although it was like a tragic, beautiful whirlwind of a romance, there was no, people of color that I could really see and say, wow, this is how I can grow up and be, or this is the type of romance that I could have. So I wanted everyone, not just white, black, Hispanic, Asian, I wanted to represent someone like a little girl like me that's reading stories and that is coming up and they're saying, I can have something like this too. So that kind of, brought about why I wanted to write this story, and not, like I said, not trying to give too much away, but the male character is from that time era, the late 1800s, early 1900s, which is one of my favorite eras. It's so romantic. And so I kind of wanted to bridge that gap and kind of create something and have fun with it as well too. And I just wanted to make sure, hi, how are you? Make sure that I kind of like create a whirlwind of a romance story in that way. So that's kind of the reason why I wrote the book. I also, a lot of people ask, the process of like kind of writing a story and where do you really start off with? And I feel like there's no easy way to like answer that question. I feel like it kind of comes with like your dreams and your imagination, and it's as easy as just like walking down the street or driving a car, and you kind of have that inspiration hit and it kind of catapults into something even bigger. And it's funny, my husband always says that I'm like the most restless sleeper because I'm always like thinking of new ideas or having new ideas pop into my head. And so I'll get up at like 2 a.m. or like 12 o'clock because an idea kind of surfaced in my head and I have to write it down before it disappears. So that's kind of what I like to tell, new blossoming writers or people that are just kind of starting out and they're stuck in what I like to call the dead zone, which is when you can't finish writing or you're just completely stuck and you're just having writer's block. I do believe that like each and every character that you create has its own personality, and if you just leave it alone and let that character tell its own story, I do believe that you'll be able to finish and kind of it'll blossom into something the way that it's like meant to finish and the way that it's supposed to turn out. And I actually did a podcast not too long ago, an interview, and they asked me, what is like your favorite thing that you take away from writing a story, and how do you cultivate all these characters? Because, I write from being a 16-year-old girl to a 45 or 50-year-old father, and that's definitely not me, obviously, but it's like, how do you, kind of do these different personalities? And I say, there's so many different pieces of me that goes into each and every one of my characters. And I think the biggest thing is I pull a lot from my acting. And when you take a role as an actress, you completely throw your entire mindset out the door and you focus on solely what that character is bringing and what you want to portray in that character. So I think when I was writing this and when I write other stories, I no longer think about it the way that I would think about it, but I would think about it in the way that this character would sort of think. And I think one of the best characters I've ever written is probably my like evil or malicious character, just because I'm so fluff with a lot of my writing. So kind of doing the thought process of such a like Maleficent character was a lot of fun because I'm normally thinking on the bright and sunny side of things. But writing Edwin, which is like the main evil character, I got to like kind of think maliciously, which was a little bit more fun, to be honest, than thinking, on the bright and sunny side. So I think that's probably one of my favorite characters that I've written, on top of course, Angelica, who's the main character, just because she took a lot of quality traits that I wish I had, if that made sense. So she's very, opinionated and bold in her personality, and she stands for what she believes in, and she's very vocal about it, which I'm more of the timid side when it comes to a lot of my opinions. So I really respect her in that aspect, because she does stand up for what she believes in, and she will let you know that she doesn't care what you believe. It's what she basically believes in. So I think another character that I really enjoyed writing was the Wales boy as well too, just because he, not like I said, not giving too much away, he kind of reminds me a lot of Mr. Darcy. And if you guys haven't read Pride and Prejudice, when Elizabeth Bennet, who's the main character in that story, when she first meets Mr. Darcy, she despises him because he is just not a very nice person, to keep it PG. He's very demeaning to her, he is very sarcastic, and he's not very chivalrous like his personality kind of develops into. And I wanted to play around with that with the Wales boy, and kind of like build upon a little bit of Heathcliff, which is from Wuthering Heights, his like very isolated stoic personality, but then add little bits of like sarcasm and just bring this character to life. And I've always been very fascinated with like the European British type of just like sarcasm and jargon. So I wanted to kind of combine that and create this male persona and character. And he was just so much fun bringing to life. And just talking from like a little bit of the people that I've talked to that have read it, they said that they really felt as if, they knew someone like that. And I think that's the biggest thing, is the takeaway is if you can read this story and feel like you've known these characters pretty much all your life, I feel as if I've done something right. Because I know me personally, when I'm reading a story, I want to escape the mundane and go to a different place. And especially in these crazy times, I think stories will be your best friend, because we all kind of need a little bit of an escape right now. So this will hopefully transport you to a different place, to a place of magic, to a place of, mystery, and just a romance that hopefully, overwhelms you and allows you to kind of go back to when you were a high school student and you found that first love for the first time. I think the world gives you little inklings of magic, and I think love is definitely the biggest one, because when you find that special person, I like to say like the soulmate in your life, that is what creates color in your world and magic in your world, and just kind of brings out the happiness and the joy inside of you. So that's the kind of relationship I feel like Char and Angelica has, and it was so beautiful being able to tell their story and to write their story and share it with all of you guys. And that's pretty much my little spew of the book. I can open it up for questions if you guys have any. It could be about writing process or just the story in general. Anything under the sun, if you guys have any. I know it's
okay. I got one question. I read the book, and like you said, I don't want to give away much of the details of what the book is, because some people haven't purchased it yet. But what I found more amazing than anything is that how love can be so strong, and it can go from one century to another. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I guess one of the things that I wanted to, maybe you can explain to me a little bit, is about how did that love come into focus where it drew her to the place and from the past to the future where how he wanted to get in touch with her.
That's a really good question. So I kind of like battled with how I wanted to kind of create this atmosphere of how they met each other. And a little bit in the beginning of the story, I talked about how Angelica felt as if something was missing in her life. Even though she was happy, she always felt like there was like an inkling of herself that wasn't there. And I like to be, like I said, very romantic in my thought process. And I do believe that you meet people and you kind of look at them and you're like, wow, I feel like I've met you before, but I don't know exactly like where I've met you before. And I think that that's kind of what I wanted to play upon. I don't know if you guys have ever watched the TV show Outlander. It was also a book. And it's basically a girl that is from the 1920s, and she goes to this like moor, and she gets thrown back into the past in like early Scotland, and she basically meets this guy, and she's like, I think I felt like I've always known you, but they basically cultivate this relationship, and then she ends up going back to the future, but she meets him in the future. So I kind of wanted to like play on a little bit of that. So although she felt as if, you know, something was missing, she basically has felt this, and then with the change of events, it kind of spirals her to go to this mansion, which is where she was meant to be at the end of the day. And he's kind of weirdly like drawn in this place as well too, and so she kind of meets him through that. But it wouldn't, the events that happened wouldn't have allowed her to kind of be where she was supposed to be, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how I played upon the whole like star-crossed lovers that, you know, felt as if they've known each other before. Good question. You have a question? Yes.
So do you think this is going to be like a sequel or a series of books? Are you going to have a continuation on the same storyline, or do you think you might go in a different direction?
Oh, for sure. I've actually started to like write the second book already. And like I said, not trying to give too much away, but if you've read the book, you know that something really drastic happens at the end that kind of changes Angelica's life altogether, more so than you know, what happens in the beginning of the book with her losing her mom. So I'm really going to play on that and how this change pretty much not only changes her relationship with the Wales boy, but just kind of changes her whole outlook on everything altogether. It really tests her in the second book. So that was a good question. There will be a sequel to it.
I have a question. What advice would you have for inspiring writing?
I think the biggest thing is never be afraid to write what comes into your mind, no matter how crazy or weird it may seem. I think some of the best books out there are the weirdest ones and the most odd and creative, because, you know, there can always be more Harry Potters or Twilights or, you know, Lord of the Rings or, you know, To Catch a Mockingbird, all those type of books. But I think the biggest thing is to just be unique in who you are and to kind of create something that's different, because people love to get into, you know, different type of mindsets and just be immersed in something that they haven't seen before. And I think all the great classics have done that. So I would say just be unique to yourself, write what makes you happy, and the right people will find that story and relate to it at the end of the day too.
I want to know, what was the writing time frame and process and editing like? What was the span of that?
Oh my gosh, that's probably the easy part was writing it. The hard part was taking stuff out and editing it. And I think like any writer can definitely say that nothing is ever good enough. You know, you're constantly always changing and constantly always editing. And there's even to this day when, you know, my husband and I will read it and I'm like, I should have done that a little bit differently, or I should have changed this up a little bit differently. So I feel like as a perfectionist, I don't think anything is ever 100% good enough. But I think once you can kind of like sit back and say like, this is how my character would handle it, or this is how, you know, I expected them to do this, then you know it's ready for other people's eyes. Another thing I would say is, you know, I use a lot of media to kind of like inspire me, music as well too. So whenever I was writing a scene and I felt a little bit jarred, or I felt as if, you know, I couldn't finish it, I would play music in the background, and that music would kind of like guide me and inspire me to finish up a scene, because I would have it like play out in my head. And so sometimes I'll even listen to a song and I'll be like, wow, this song inspired, you know, this scene or this interaction with the character. So I think, like, you know, everything around you will kind of help develop that story, and will definitely help with the editing process. Also, a different pair of eyes will also help, because I can read something 500 times and I'm like, okay, this seems fine to me, but it's always good to have a different perspective reading your work as well too, because they can definitely see something that you can't see. So that was a good question too. Yes.
Oh, that is dandy.
I know. I can still see behind the mask.
First of all, I'm going to be sitting there for a little while. You are doing an excellent job. I love everything that you're
Thank
saying.
you.
As a writer as well. When you speak of editing, and whether you make your decisions on what's not good enough, is it based on how you feel or what you think other people want to feel the most? Which one weighs out the most?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes I wish I would like to say that it's based off what I feel, but the marketing side of me also takes that what other people will relate to as well too in the back of my mind. But I think the biggest thing, and I know this sounds super cheesy, but it's just how you would think in that mindset of that character, like how they would do it. And I, as an example, when I was editing this and writing this, I had a scene that I just really wanted to have in there. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be the best scene. Like, I thought it out in my head, and I was like, you know, it's gonna be so romantic and it's just gonna be amazing. And then I read it over and I was like, okay, I'm almost forcing this to be in here just because I liked it so much, but it didn't necessarily like make sense in the overall story. And I felt as if, you know, Angelica wouldn't have acted this way. You know, although like I'm taking more of my personality and pushing it on her, opposed to saying, okay, like this is how flawed she is. You know, she does let her mouth run away with her sometimes, and that gets her into trouble. So I had to really think about, you know, how someone that's unlike me in that aspect would handle this. So I think that was the biggest thing that was difficult in any character that you write, is making sure you're not projecting, you know, your emotions and your feelings on the character, but having them come out and really kind of make the story in their own way. So I think that's the biggest thing. Hopefully I answered that okay. Does anyone else have any other questions?
How do you deal with writer's block?
That was my question.
Yeah, no. I think writer's block is probably the hardest thing that any writer has to deal with. I think my biggest thing, and my husband actually told me this one, he's like, if you feel as if you're stuck on something, don't force it, kind of like take some time and just kind of go away from it, because I think the more time you take away and to like really think and like contemplate and just go through life, because I think a lot of writing is inspired by events that happen in your life, and I think that's what makes it so beautiful, is because it's channeled through what you deal with. And I know when I first started writing this book, I had like a loss in our family, and I didn't know how to really deal with that grieving process. So instead of, you know, how some people will channel it into writing music, or, you know, doing something different, or doing karate or working out, I channeled those emotions into what Angelica feels. And I think like that is the beautiful thing about writing, is that you can help somebody else if they're feeling a certain way about a certain topic or issue, and they may be in that weird space in their life, and they'll read something like this and say, oh, you know, this character made it through it, or they got through this in this way. It may not work for me, but I know at the end of the story I can get through it as well too. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just kind of let it go for a little bit and then come back to it with a brand new perspective, and just outline. I mean, when I was like first writing this, the way that I had it ended was completely different. and that was just through a rough outline. And then I started to write the story, and I just couldn't do it. I was like, I can't do it this way, you know, I can't end it this way. So I completely changed the ending after I got to like the middle of the story. So I wouldn't have been able to do that if I wouldn't have like stepped away and just said, okay, this is how I kind of think it should go now that I've started to develop these characters. Because, you know, when you're first starting out, your characters are just like little babies, you know, they're so minute. And you're kind of like learning about them as you write through their persona and through their perspectives. And so once they're kind of full-fledged adults, I like to say, then you kind of really know how to, you know, end or change or do different things with it. That's a good question too. Anybody else? Or are we good? Do one more? Yes.
I probably missed it. So how did you decide on the name Angelica for the character?
Oh, that's a good one. Oh, okay. So no, you haven't missed it. And this is actually a question that hasn't come up yet. So I'm excited for even people that are following me to learn about this. So one of the quotes in the story, the main male character, the Wales boy Charles, he actually says what her name means, and it means of the angels. And I meticulously picked that because, not trying to give too much away, he feels as if she has this like angelic presence, and you know, kind of where he's at, she's his angel, if that makes sense. So I purposefully picked that name strictly because of that. And not gonna lie, I kind of went over the Rugrats a couple of times. I'm like, oh, the Rugrats Angelica is anything but that. But I was like, wow, you know what? I'm gonna change the view of that name, and I'm gonna use it to something different. So I did a lot of research with all my characters. I researched their names, and I had like 3 main names picked out for her, but that was the one that really stuck with me, and I wanted that symbolism behind her name as well too.
The Wales boy also, because I was trying to find my way here with the GPS. I thought I saw Wales community or something.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know if that had something to do with it.
No, but like it's so that's the main character. That's his last name, and so because they refer to it as his mansion, when she moves in, I kind of really like that play on words. And so the main male's character, his name is Charles. They call him Char, and his last name is Wales. So that's kind of how the title came about, because Angelica gets a little bit frustrated because when she kind of moves into her new school, a lot of people are saying, oh, you live in, you know, the Wales boy mansion, you live in his house. And she's like, you know, that's not his house anymore, that's my house. So that's kind of where that kind of played about with coming up with that title as well too.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
I got just one question. I'm trying to phrase it the right way. When you start to get your book published and it goes through editing and all that stuff, have you ever had an editor to tell you to change the scene or change the wording of some of your characters to make it, to kind of flesh it out? Or have you ever went along with what they said, or you decided to keep it, but just make the correction, the editing, make the maybe the grammatical correction and everything, because they tend to have sort of a English dialect, and sometimes the tenses and stuff is a little bit different. So did your editor ever tell you, well, let's change it when it fits modern day language instead of the language that they spoke a long time ago?
Well, the good thing about it, so I think one of the biggest things that like me and my agent got into, like not really like an altercation about, but just like we kind of like had words with, was just how they felt as if a certain scene should go. And I basically told them, like, granted we are thinking about the overall sales, because that's what they're there to do pretty much, is to make the book sell and to promote it. But then at the end of the day, you don't want to get it to where it's not even your story any longer, and you're reading it and you're like, wow, this is not even what I kind of wrote. So I think the biggest thing is to find that like happy medium to where, of course, it's making sense and it's flowing properly, but not, like you said, changing it to the point where you don't even recognize your work anymore. I think that's the biggest thing. One of my favorite rappers is Chance the Rapper, and why I really like him is because he kind of goes against the mold. He kind of went out on his own and did his own thing and without a label, and I really admire him for that, just because he could do whatever he wanted to do because he promoted himself as a rapper. So that's kind of how I think about it, is it's your story and your character's story to tell. So no one else can kind of understand them the way that you do. So I think the biggest thing is to just really firmly believe in what you believe in and stick to that. Now, if there's little things that could help it and add a little bit of sparkle to it, by all means do that. But don't change your overall voice and tone of like where you believe your story should go.
Okay.
When you say don't change, as if, do you really have that option? How much of an option do you have?
True. I think you have to, sometimes you have to kind of fight for it. A really good agent believes in your vision. I firmly believe that. That's in anything, with acting as well too, and with writing. They love the story and they love where they can take it. So that's why I say, like, some people ask me, you know, they're like, it's so hard to find an agent, but I think it plays two ways. Like, you have to have a really good relationship with your agent, because at the end of the day, they have to believe fully in you and they have to support you, and you have to support them as well too with getting everything together for your book. So if you have like a bomb agent and they're like, you know, top 10, like really great, but they don't believe in you as an author or your work, then it's not going to work out, because they're going to be promoting to where they think it's just going to sell, and they're going to completely not take you out of the equation, but you're just an addition in the equation, if that makes sense. Opposed to when they believe in your work and they believe in your creativity, and they're like, okay, I see where you've taken this, we're just going to add a little bit of like sparkle to it, but it's ready to go, and kind of build upon it from that. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just finding like an agent that really meshes well with like your personality and like who you are as well too. So I think that's like the hugest thing in any type of process. It's just kind of like finding that balance with that. That's a good question.
How did you find your agent? How did they find you?
So I do blogging part-time, and through my blog, someone had reached out to me about, you know, doing a book, just because I do so much writing, but it's more so for like fashion and lifestyle. But it's funny because I had did a post about poetry, and it was just a filler post. I didn't think anybody would really like it, to be honest, because my following is, like I said, predominantly fashion based. But I guess someone liked it, and someone reached out to me, and they, you know, said, you know, you have a great way of, you know, expressing words in a creative way. You know, have you ever thought about this? And I was like, whoa, you just got me in the right place, because I have many stories tucked away in crevices I can't even find half the time. So it just kind of fell into place in that way. But for someone that's kind of like researching, I had a couple of people even on Instagram ask me like, where do I even start? And I think the biggest thing is where I would start is just being local. My agent is local, and I think that helps, because you get to really build up that relationship with them, and you can always hop on a phone call with them, and then they do a lot of the like negotiations for you. Same thing kind of with blogging as well too. I have like an acting agent, so they do all the nitty gritty stuff that I don't want to talk about, which is like the financial stuff. So that kind of helps a little bit in that aspect. And then they kind of like help you get it into a publishing company, and then they work out the deals with like Amazon and Barnes and Noble and like all those stores. But the only person that's gonna work as hard, no matter, like, no disrespect to them, because they do everything that they can do, but no one's gonna work as hard for you than yourself at the end of the day. So even though they're doing a lot and they're promoting a lot and they're, you know, giving you their suggestions, you're gonna have to, I said I have 3 jobs. I have my job that I work full time, I have my blogging job, and then I have my author job. So they all kind of take up 24 hours of my life. But at the end of the day, when you're passionate about something and you really believe in something, I don't necessarily think that it is a job at that point. It's just doing something that you love and hoping that someone will pick it up and enjoy it at the same time too.
Yeah, you mentioned Chance the Rapper.
I do love Chance the Rapper.
And so with him, you spoke of how he basically took control of his whole career. In comparison, how much, it was, when I asked too personal a question,
No.
but how much of your work at the end of the day do you still own after all of the other people are involved, unlike with his career?
I think the biggest thing for someone that's writing a book, and this is so pivotal, and it's something that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about, but I think it should be spoken about, is you should always copyright your work before you submit it to an agent and before you submit it to a publishing company, depending on the route that you go. Because at the end of the day, if anything ever happens where they're seeing your work and they're reading it, and then you find something oddly similar that comes out, you're like, oh, this is like my idea. You will have that legality behind it, and you have it copywritten. I copyrighted this before I even submitted like the first couple of chapters to my agent. So I think the biggest thing, now it's different if you're writing like a query letter and they're like, hey, let me see the first 3 chapters. I mean, they can't really get too much from that first 3 chapters unless they ask for a full synopsis. Then I would say definitely get it copyrighted, because, you know, they're getting basically how the entire story is going to play out. And you like to think that you like to look at the good in people, but you still always have to be safe and protect yourself. So I would say before you even start sending out those query letters and sending out those synopsises and everything, get everything copyrighted so you know that your work is safe. You're welcome. Any other questions you guys have? Good? All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming. Truly appreciate it. Just a little bit of information, if you guys are watching even on Instagram, you probably already know this, but you can purchase the book via my website, which is rachelmoretti.com, on Amazon as well too, and on Barnes & Noble. So thank you guys, like I said, once again, so much for being here. I know times are crazy right now, so I truly appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching, and yay, now for the drink.
Also, I'd just like to let everybody know that I prepared in the next room snacks and